Hello, and we are live at 11:05 on BC with Spirit Cars. Josh, the voice of Spirit Cars, is behind the camera, and I'm getting pretty good at that, ain't I? After about 3 weeks, we got the intro figured out. Who knows, pretty soon we may have technology and we'll actually be showing a title for a show and everything else. But today, this is about ready to go. I've kind of left this open a little bit so I can show you some brakes and a friction shock. This is going to go in a truck with another car, and it's going out east. So this is a Spirit chassis. It's for a C cab. A customer wanted us to, I can't remember his name. What's his name?
Larry.
Larry. Okay, yeah, I know. So this is Larry's chassis. He'd already got the C cab. And so we painted it, we assembled it. We're still going to bleed the brake lines. We haven't done that yet. So when we start, I got a handful of parts back there. I don't know if I have them all, but it's a 4-inch drop axle. You got your shackles, you got your spring, you got your drag link, hold it together. On Spirit, we didn't throw this on here yet, but we use what is called a slingshot steering. And where that name comes from, if you look at this upper steering arm, if I pull that off, it looks like a slingshot. But it steers, you get that as parallel as you can to the radius rods. It steers the left side spindle, and the left side spindle through the drag link will steer your right side. Now if you hear somebody talking about cross steer, what you have to do with that is you put your steering box a little farther up forward. It'll sit right in here, and the box will steer like that. You won't have a drag link at all. As far as you won't have a slingshot at all. Your drag link will come across. Your steering arm on this side is going to be a little bit longer, and there'll be 2 bolts. So your steering arm is going to attach right here, and it's going to steer from the center. And your steering box is going to be way up front. This is a clean look. This works for a T-bucket. The argument you're going to hear with this one here is bump steer. And what will happen if you can picture geometry when your front axle is going up and down, this is staying the same, and what it's going to do, it's going to move this a little bit. But if you think about it this way, I'm going to have a little bit of a curve from that, but I am not going to have even a 1/16 of an inch. So the maximum bump steer you can get on this is just so minute, and you would have to almost be off-roading to get your front end to travel that much. So yes, I've heard the argument, yes, geometrically there is technically some bump steer, but in theory you cannot feel it, and it has no bearing on your steering. So I feel absolutely comfortable. We use slingshot steering. I'm happy with it. Performance wise, I like it. It's clean looking, and I'm going to stick to it. So everybody can argue about it from here on out, but there's how Spirit does most of our T's. Now we can do it the other way. We have for the look, especially if we go to maybe a spring over system on a Model A or something like that, we'll do that. Shocks. There's a couple ways to do a shock, and these are called friction shocks. And you can kind of see, let me put my brake parts down here. It's got a washer, and these are rubber washers. Here's the shock itself. And there's another rubber washer. Now what we do, we take a threaded rod and run it all the way through. You can see it moving over on that side. So when I tighten one bolt, it's going to tighten both of these equal. And the tighter I make them, the more friction it puts on these washers and on these rubber washers, and the less that this arm will move. So the more friction I got on it, the harder that arm is to move. You can use an oil or gas shock. We've got a different mount that comes up here and comes down. There's a, right here you go. Good job, Josh. This will bolt on it from here, and it, with the 2 rod ends, allows it to pivot. So as your front end comes up and down, your shock works like that. If it's a gas shock, it comes up to the side, works the same way. We've got a panhard rod on it here. You can see the panhard rod. The main reason for that is if you look at your shackle, you've got some movement in your shackle. So your front end can sway back and forth a little bit. With the panhard, it can't. And the same thing, as it goes up a little bit, it may move your front over a little bit, only the amount of the arc, but it's very insignificant. So on this one, we got a 4-inch drop tube axle, radius rods, and you can do a 4-link suspension, but these are radius rods. A big trick when you put a suspension together, I don't have these tight yet, but if I pull this bolt out of here, you can look at it. I'm putting that bolt right in. Now, if my axle, I could pull this all the way up here. You can see that. So if my hole was way off, I could pull it up. If it was down, I could push it down. But if I had to do that, what I'm doing, I'm loading the entire front end. I'm turning the entire frame into a torsion bar. A lot of times people will call and say, oh, my car don't sit straight. They think it's a shocks or something, that the whole thing is leaning. I don't know. What do you think, Josh? 90% of the time?
Yeah, it's...
The problem is right there. And all you got to do to fix that is, put my parts back on or I'm going to lose it here, is adjust your clevises here. I can adjust this clevis out a little bit and this one in a little bit, or whichever way I want to do it, and to get it adjusted right. You want 5 to 7 degrees, this axle angling back. So it's another, you adjust that in here, so you can adjust your front suspension that way. I want like...
So show that, because we get a lot of questions on that. When you set it up, how do you set your front end up?
Okay, so if you look down the axle, you see how this axle is angled back a little bit? This is going to be within 5 to 7 degrees. If you get this angled back 5 to 7 degrees, and you can actually put a degree finder on it right here to find that, and you're good to go. If you need to adjust it, you can adjust it out right in here, and that'll get your angle going back. Toe in, I like to go about an 1/8 inch toe in, and you don't need no high dollar equipment. You can take a tape measure and have a buddy or do it yourself. Hook a tread on that side and measure a tread on the other side, and use the same treads on the back side, and then you can measure it that way. Your drag link has a right hand and a left hand thread on it. So if I turn it one way, loosen your jam nuts. And while I'm talking about jam, this happens to be a left-hand thread one, and this is a right-hand thread one. So if I loosen them both up, I can twist it one way, and you can see it's moving it out there, and it's moving the other side out at the same time. And if I do it this way, it's moving them both in. So I can adjust it like that. You need a jam nut. You need a jam nut. You need a jam nut. Even on a rod end like this where it can't work itself loose, you need to keep the pressure on there so it's not banging itself and loosening up your thread. So jam nuts on everything, just you need that. We use a 37 to 41 Ford spindle. These are new spindles.
U.S. made.
U.S. made? Are they? Yes, U.S. made. And they press it on a bearing adapter, or we press it on. So we push the bearing adapter on so that we can use a GM caliper and a GM rotor. Both these parts are parts store available. What is this, a Camaro?
82 to 87 Camaro for the caliper and 70 to 78 Camaro for the rotor.
Okay, there you go. Josh, Mr. Parts guy, knows the numbers. If you need to know part numbers, you can whip them off. Got our front end together. You got, make sure you grease your bearings. Make sure there's a grease sert in here. Make sure you grease all that. There's set screws to hold everything. Again, always make sure it's tight. We get to the brakes. I've got the brakes off on this one. Now there's different threads, and be aware of that. I mean, you might have a compression fitting, or you might have this would be an AN3 fitting, or you might have a pipe thread. This is a, pipe thread going to an AN3 to a whatever. You just can't thread one into another one because it's close. You gotta make sure you match what you're doing. So on this one here, on a Spirit car especially, you want to put, and we're using through frame fittings, you want to make sure those fittings are towards the top of the frame. If you put them towards the bottom of the frame, potentially you could have a problem with the radius rod coming up and hitting that, and that could break or fracture the line a little bit. This is an AN fitting, so this is virtually a compression fitting. You can see it's kind of rounded on this end and rounded inside of there. So once this is tightened down there, I come around to my banjo bolt, and it's just tightened down to the banjo bolt. So we get that all tightened and probably into there. This will cut off when you get it all tightened. A couple of the components. When I said banjo bolt, this is a banjo, and then there's a bolt that goes through that. You can see it down here. Let me get this off.
And we use a 10 millimeter.
On this caliper.
Yep, metric caliper.
So you've got the banjo, and I don't have the banjo bolt, but the banjo bolt will go through that, and there's some holes in that banjo bolt to let the fluid go through into the caliper itself. Now you're going to need to have what they call crush washers. These are brass washers that go on the top side and bottom side between the banjo and the banjo bolt, and between the banjo and the caliper. Necessary parts. You need to have these. That helps get it sealed and no leaks there. I've got a compression fitting. We've already got it. I think we went over brake line and braking fittings, double flare it. Of course, double flare everything on a brake line. And that goes into the adapter here, and it comes around. On a Spirit car, we split it in the front and go down both sides, come down. I mean, I could come across here and split it up here, but you've got a master cylinder that's split. So you got your front and your rear. You got a proportion. The front end on a T-bucket is so light, we put the proportioning valve in the front. Again, there'll be an argument, oh, it's supposed to go in the back, it's supposed to go in the front. It needs to go where it needs to go. You want your wheels to stop all in proportion to each other. The last thing you need is for your front wheels locking up way before your front wheels, and on a slick garage or in gravel or something else, you're driving along and your front wheel's locked up and you're pushing gravel, or you're just sliding in the garage and your back wheels are still wanting to drive. So that's the reason what this valve does. It just restricts the flow of the fluid going to the front. So I restrict the flow. That means my back brakes are getting more pressure. They're stopping faster than the front ones, but they're stopping equal. That's the goal, is to stop equal. This one we have disc brakes on the back. This is actually a disc kit. It's a 10-bolt Chevy rear end. So get a cover. I don't know, does it get a cover before it goes? Okay, so it gets a cover on it. Pretties that up. It's out of an S10. Great vehicle, great rear ends.
S10 Blazer 4x4 is what we use for the C cabin or 27.
C cabin, the 27. I think that's what, 52 inches backing plate to backing plate. And if we use just a regular S10, all the rest of them are 48 inches backing plate to backing plate. They're great for just a regular T-bucket. And 8.8 works good out of an Explorer. Most of the 9 inches, unless you get out of an old, the old Granadas, if they had a V8 and it had a 9-inch under it, it's narrower. The old Lincoln Versailles, some of those are great rear ends. But normally if you get a 9-inch rear end, it's way too wide and you have to narrow it down. We use John's. It's the rear ends we use are manufactured rear end. New housings and everything are cut down, so it's new. Again, we come down with the brakes. I only use one braided line coming down on this side and one coming down on this side, and plumb it all the way around.
So we put a T, and then on our rear panhard we drill a hole. So when you're running your brake line for disc brakes, drill you a hole and then run across. And
so clean. We want it all clean. This will all be riveted in with some fittings. This This one doesn't have it. We use through frame fittings here. I got one of these out just in case. You can also weld a tab on. There's a bunch of different component parts. If you weld a tab on, say here, you can push a fitting into it, and then there's a clip that holds the fitting. It just snaps in. So your tab can be welded and it can be all painted. That's another way to do it. I mean, a lot of options. Fundamentally, we're dealing with hydraulics. Air can compress. You take some water, you just don't compress air. You take the hydraulic fluid or the brake fluid in here. As the master cylinder compresses, pushes the fluid out the cylinder, it compresses. There's some cups in here, it pushes it, that's what makes it stop. I mean, all you're doing is pushing fluid out of there and pushing it into here. Leverage is a big thing. I mean, so if you're not having enough brake sometimes and you're doing just a standard brake system, if you move your pedal down, you got less leverage. If you move it up, you got more leverage. So you're going to have an easier pedal and a harder, you could stop easier the higher you go here. The farther down you go, you got more travel, but it's a little bit harder to push. There's different ratios in the master cylinders. You can also use a power booster. Fits on here. We offer it both ways. The car is so light you don't need to have power brakes on it. It's just a chassis ready to go. We're just going to button it up here after lunch, and we're pretty much just waiting for the truck, and this is going out east. So there you go, a Spirit chassis. This is how we do it. There's no one way to do it, but there are some wrong ways. Make sure you, in the back, I'm just going to point this out before we say, where's the yellow book at? These are rear radius rods. Same thing. For years, we buy cold roll steel. It had a standard. I'm going to say China. I'm not going to blame it all on them. But the standards have gone away. You used to say there's so many, notches on a bolt. It's a grade 8 bolt. You could read it that way, and it meant something. Honestly, steel grades, aluminum grades, bolt grades, I don't trust any of them anymore. For years, we ran them without a brace right here. Never, and we put lots of torque and just all kinds of stress on them and never bent a one. Then all of a sudden they start bending right in here. So we put the brace in. So just be aware of that. It's not like it used to be where our standards were super tight on the steel that you buy. It's just not that way anymore. Cold rolled is supposed to be cold rolled, hot roll is supposed to be hot rolled, and we use 3/16 on the frame. Sometimes a little overkill is better than being a little light. So that's it for today. I've got a lot of information out there, but I think we'll read from the book. We got a couple books. The Hot Rod Man wrote 2 of them. Just Coffee Break Contemplations, and we have Pass It On.
Pass it on.
Pass it on. We're going to pass it on today.
Because you read the last couple's been from the coffee.
So they're not proverbs. Don't hold the weight of a proverb, but these are Ernie thoughts. The Hot Rod Man. Oh, I need to listen to this one. An interesting person is a good listener. A boring person keeps talking without listening breaks. So I'm going to work on that one. I may read that a couple times today. Conversation is 2 ways. I know I've been in a lot of conversations that just went one way, and that's not always a good one. So for today, I'll give you a few brake tips, a few chassis tips. I think we need to actually build a front end here pretty soon. I've got some requests to go over a Model A. We got a Model A over there. We may talk about that. We're going to do a test drive out on the road with John's car. That's getting ready to go on a truck. And so today's Tuesday. Stick with us.
I do have one request before we go.
What's that?
Let's show them the rear. Everybody wants to know, can you put a hitch on a T-bucket?
Oh, there we go. You can put a hitch on a T-bucket. And what we do, I don't have this receiver right here, but we weld this on. And the box comes at this level right here. On this one, it'll be the C cab, so it'll be the bottom of the body will be down here. But the way we make the receiver, it pushes up into the receiver here, and there's a pin goes here, and it comes down at an L. That way, if you want to pull a trailer and everything, you put your hitch in, put the pin in, pull it, no problem. If you want to just have your bucket and not see that hitch coming out the back, pull the pin, pull it out, and you don't even know that this is here. We've done several different ones and made contraptions and did it. We have found that this works fine. You're not pulling a huge amount of weight with your T-bucket. I mean, this works excellent, more than fine. This is a couple different prototypes that we finally got to here. So
And that one will pull a boat, because we had a customer that pulls a boat with his 27, a bass boat.
Really?
Yep. Remember Jim Gaston?
Ah. I mean, the welds are good. If you bend this or break a weld on this, you won't. I mean, you won't. So. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for being with us.